This is the Yahweh blog presentation on Islam's Holocaust, Part 2. If you have not yet watched the first episode, which is longer than most of our presentations, at an hour and 45 minutes, I ask you to listen to it now before we proceed together on this, the second episode. This is an exceedingly somber day. It is a day that I knew would come and that I have braced for considerable time, because it was obvious that the Muslims who abducted the Bibas children, their mother, along with them, had murdered them, and that there were going to be bodies returned, not alive children. And it was obvious that was the case. It's been obvious now for a better part of 9 months, maybe a year, that was the case. What was even more horrifying, though, is the way that many tens of thousands of Muslims gathered around this spectacle with posters blaming the death of Bibas children not on Muslims who abducted them. And let's be clear, it was not Hamas that abducted them. Muslims. Muslims that robbed Israel of these children and their mother were not Hamas. Hamas is simply a symptom of the problem of Islam. They blamed their deaths not on their abduction of these children, not on the war that they started with Israel, not on their mishandling of them, not on their captivity, forced captivity of children. Who in the hell would do that? What kind of monster steals children to use them as a bargaining chip and then has the audacity to blame the victims for their deaths? We're dealing with utter demonic savages here. The way they had their billboards behind them with their black coffins and them trying to blame everyone but themselves for the savagery they perpetrated. Repulsive. It was reprehensible. One of the most disgusting spectacles in human history. Even the Nazis had too much shame to parade the bodies of those they had killed in front of slogans of the party, the way these Muslims did. They literally celebrate death. So I knew that it was time for me to do what I have been reluctant to do, which is to actually read from the books that I have written. This one is from Slaughter. It's volume 4 of Goddamn Religion. There are 5 volumes. I have moved them on this video over to my left shoulder, to the right for you. Snake, Satanic Submission, Slaughter, Sunnah, and Siratan. They're each 850 pages. They're all written exactly as this. If I hold it up to you, the camera should be able to see that these books are filled with the Islamic scriptures. I present them in their entirety and then I comment on them so that you might understand exactly what was at stake, what they said that was true, what they said that was false, what was claimed by Muhammad, what was claimed by Allah, what was claimed by the Muslims surrounding them, what the circumstances were. It's all there. Goddamn Religion is the most comprehensive presentation of Islam's beginnings ever written. No one on earth knows Muhammad or Allah better than I do. And because of that, I decided that this must be the day that I would begin sharing from these books with you as part of this program. So that Israel, you know who your enemy really is. You know that Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the PLO, Fatah, Boko Haram, the Islamic State, ISIS, all of them, Al Qaeda, they're nothing but symptoms of Islam. Islam is the problem, and it's been a problem for 1,400 years. And there is no sense in denying it. Yes, it means that you've made a lot of mistakes, Israel. It means you've tried to encourage Muslims to live among you when they are indoctrinated from birth, not only to hate you, but to believe that the single greatest thing they can do in their religion is to kill you. Islam can't be resolved. It can't be fixed. It can't be modified. It is what it is, and that's why we are presenting Islam as it began, in Muhammad's own words, in the words of those who fought with him, in Allah's words. We'll begin this program where we left off on the last one with a reading from the Quran. This is from the 33rd surah of the Quran. It begins by Allah taking credit for a horrible defeat of the Muslims. That was the only battle that they fought that was defensive, and that their own kin, their family from Kaabaville, had come up to stop Muhammad and the first Muslims from terrorizing them. They were slaughtering them, and these merchants wanted the Muslims to stop terrorizing them. They wanted to stop robbing them and kidnapping them and murdering them. And so they brought the battle to Muhammad, and they whacked him, but good. They broke Muhammad's teeth. You see pictures of Muhammad being toothless. They knocked out his teeth. Everyone around Muhammad was killed. They had the tables turned on them. They were terrorized in this defensive battle, and they lost it badly. And the whole reason they turned on the Qurayza Jews was because if you're going to be a sand pirate, if you're going to lead a criminal enterprise, then once your followers suffer a tremendous defeat, you need an easy kill. And the Jews were an easy kill. They were unarmed, and they were rich. And so Muhammad and his goons decided they would plunder them, they would kill them, they would rape them, they would enslave them. And that is the story that we have been reading of the Qurayza Jews. And in this backdrop, Quran 33:25 was cited so that Muhammad could claim that Allah was a full-on participant in all of this, making Allah a terrorist, a murderer, a slaver. Quran 33:25, and we'll read from 25 through 27. Allahu turned back the unbelievers in their rage. They did not obtain any good or advantage. They had whacked the Muslims in Yathrib, but nonetheless, Allah claimed that he was there, man. And he's a pretty inept God, I'll tell you that, because they were pummeled. Allahu sufficed the believers in battle. Allahu is strong. Yeah, he's mighty. And he brought down those who backed them among the people of the book, Jews. From their strongholds, there were no such things. And cast ruba, terror, into their hearts, so that a group you killed, and a group you enslaved as captives. And he caused you to inherit their land, their homes, and their wealth, and a land you had not trodden. Allahu is on everything all-powerful. Which means it is Allah who claims to be a mass murderer. It is Allah who claims to be the slaver. It is Allah who claims to be the thief. And that makes mass murder of Jews, robbing Jews, stealing the property of Jews, their homes, their land, enslaving Jews, abducting Jews. A righteous deed in Islam. No changing this. No getting around it. No pretending that it doesn't exist. No saying, well, I don't like that interpretation of Islam. Screw you. This is what the Quran says. Just because you're ignorant of it, just because you don't like what it says, just because you want to pretend that you're out there marching with the fake Palestinians for the destruction of Israel and the death of Jews, and you don't like this because it's inconvenient to be called out for supporting a terrorist God who is murderous and who encourages slavery and thievery. It's because it's inconvenient for you. Doesn't change it, does it? This is what the Quran says. If you are a libertard progressive, particularly as a Jewish libertard progressive, particularly as a libertard that is marching in the streets and on college campuses, know the truth. This is who you are allied with. Mass murderers. Those who got their jollies enslaving and raping other people, who stole their property as part of their religious right. They perpetrated genocide on the Jews of Arabia, and yet you march and pretend that the Jews are perpetrating genocide in Gaza? How stupid, how immoral, how ignorant can you be? And Israel, why in the hell did you declare war on Hamas when the problem isn't Hamas? It's Islam. And you can't win a war against a religion with bullets and bombs. You can't make the declaration that you're going to wipe them out. Sacrifice more lives in the process. You just made a bad situation worse. You need to know that your enemy is Islam and therefore establish an entirely different tactic in confronting them. In the first episode, I told you what that tactic is. Learn to hate using your words. Expose this religion. Cite the 33rd Surah. Oh, and there are so many more. I will, over subsequent shows, give you thousands of verses that you can cite, all of which destroy the credibility of Islam. All that prove that Islam is a death cult, that it exists to annihilate all humankind. It is undeniable. Cite their scriptures, use their scriptures against them. Now, that Quranic verse is clearly among Islam's most stinging and self-incriminating indictments. It confirms an exceedingly barbaric act, but it's actually far worse than it appears, since it was Muhammad and the first Muslims who actually perpetrated these crimes: mass murder, grand theft, rape, the enslavement of an entire community of people. It confirms that Muhammad was really nothing more than Allah's henchman, and that the first Muslims were murdering for Allah. With delusions of grandeur, Allah is little more than a snake. He is the one that slithered out of the Garden of Eden and then into the Quran. While he has assumed the role of Arab rock idol, he is now the fractured black stone stuck in the wall of the Kaaba. Nothing more. He is incompetent. He can do nothing. He must inspire Muslims to kill for him. And he does. I tell Muslims who want to kill me, and I've received thousands of death threats, if your God's so goddamn powerful, he knows where I am. Send your God after me. Don't go and prove me right by you coming to do his dirty work. Because all that will do is assure that everything I've said about you is correct. Muhammad's behavior reflected his ungod's character, of course, equal parts perverted and covetous, ruthless and murderous, sadistic and demonic. He was an anti-Semite, to be sure, but he was also a gutless coward who never stood on his own 2 feet and was constantly propped up by a slithering snake. He attributed his debauchery to his alter ego, giving genocide, rape, and human trafficking a religious veneer. And that is how it remains to this day. That is why 10/7 occurred. That's why the next attack will be far worse. Unless enough Israelites read goddamn religion and put it to work for you. You don't need a Mossad. You do not need a Shin Bet. You do not need IDF intelligence. They all failed you miserably. What you need is to know your enemy. Oh, it's true. Men have plundered before. Men have robbed before. Men have murdered. They have enslaved. And they have raped before. But no God ever said, Allahu turned back the infidels in their rage. They did not obtain any advantage. Allahu sufficed the believers in battle. Allahu is strong, mighty, and he brought down those who backed them among the people of the book from their strongholds, casting terror into their hearts, so that a group you killed and a group you enslaved. And he caused you to inherit their property, their homes, and their wealth, and land you had not trodden. Allahu is on everything powerful. Islam is the most openly demonic, savage, debauched, deadly religion in the history of humankind. I've just read proof. Stop denying it. In an early chapter of Volume 1, Snake, you can see it over my shoulder, I included a speech from the Islamic world's leading imam. His name was al-Baraik. He was the Saudi ruling family's favorite sheikh. He spoke at a telethon that the Fahd family dictators had hosted to enrich the families of Pakistani suicide bombers. The esteemed Islamic cleric said, "O Muslims, don't take Jews and Christians as allies. Muslim brothers in Palestine do not have any mercy or compassion on Jews, their blood, their money, or their flesh. Their women are yours to take legitimately. Allah made them yours. Why don't you enslave their women? Why don't you wage jihad? Why don't you pillage them?" It's the message of the Quran. It is Islam. He is the foremost cleric of this disgusting and deadly, demonic religion. The universal ignorance of Islam does not change that. So now you know where the Sheikh got his material. This was what Muslims wrought on God's people 1,400 years ago. Tabari, Volume 8, page 35, Ishaq, page 464. As I shared in the first program, I'm citing from the SUNY State University of New York translation of Tabari's entire work, these 12 volumes. This is Volume 8. And from Oxford University Press, a translation provided by Gulim back in 1950 or 1955, that ilk, of the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad. I call it Ishaq since he was the one who collected these hadiths. Page 464. The Jews were made to come down, and Allah's messenger imprisoned them. And then the prophet went into the marketplace of Medina. It is still the marketplace today. And he had trenches dug in it. He sent for the Jewish men, and he had them beheaded in those trenches. They were brought out to him in batches. They numbered 800 to 900 boys and men. Let me read that again to you so that it sears into your soul. Tabari, Volume 8, page 35, Ishaq, page 464. And I quote, "The Jews were made to come down, and Allah's messenger imprisoned them. Then the prophet went out into the marketplace of Medina. It is still the marketplace today. And he had trenches dug in it. He sent for the Jewish men and had them beheaded in those trenches. They were brought out to him in batches. They numbered 800 to 900 boys and men." This is the Islam of Muhammad, the Islam of Allah, the Islam of the Sunnah, the Islam of the Quran. This is the one and only Islam. And nothing has changed or will ever change. The lone voice of the Islamic religion had the imprisoned Jews brought to him so that he might enjoy the ghoulish spectacle, just as was perpetrated in Gaza this morning. Even Hitler was too ashamed to visit Auschwitz, but not to this psychopath. He turned Yathrib into a death camp. This was how Muslims conducted their version of the Holocaust. Little did he know at the time that the actual Holocaust would be inspired by Muslims too. I shared it in the last program. I've shared it time and again on Facebook and on X, how the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem met with Hitler to convince Hitler to stop exiling Jews and to start exterminating them. And within a month of that meeting, it became the official position of the Nazi Party and the SS to exterminate Jews as opposed to exile them. And as a result of this Muslim meeting with Adolf Hitler, 6 million Jews were murdered. In words hauntingly similar to what Jews must have asked as Nazi trains hauled them off to concentration camps, we read in Tabari, Volume 8, page 35, and Ishaq, page 464. And, I'm bringing you every hadith, every oral report from Muhammad and the first Muslims pertaining to this event. All of them. I'm not cherry picking the worst from a sea of really lovely stories of how they cut off their heads by anesthetizing them first. Maybe they knocked them over the noggin so they wouldn't feel the pain. Maybe they blindfolded and put cotton in the ears of the women so they wouldn't have to hear the screams. Maybe they did it really sweetly and nicely with some lovely posters of vampires and drooling blood and pictures of the dead children in front of their coffins. As they were being taken in small groups to the prophet, they said to one another, "What do you think will be done to us?" Someone said, "Do you not understand? On each occasion, do you not see that the summoner never stops? He does not discharge anyone. And that those who are taken away, they do not come back. By God, it is death." The affair continued until the messenger of Allah had finished with them all. If 900 men and boys were dragged out of their imprisonment in batches and led to the central market square of Medina to be beheaded in front of Muhammad, this affair would have lasted 8 to 10 hours. Imagine a prophet, perverted enough to watch until he had finished with them all. It's enough to make you vomit, like I did this morning when I watched the spectacle of the Muslims in Gaza. And in reality, the community of Jews would have comprised 10,000 men, women, and children prior to the Islamic invasion, making the death toll on this day closer to 5,000. Should you wonder why I hate Islam, the Quran and Hadith, Allah and Muhammad, as well as all good Muslims who follow Allah's commands and Muhammad's example? Now you know the answer. It is the same answer the world witnessed on October 7th of 23. All good Muslims are monsters. Islam makes them that way. And that is because Allah, the God of Islam, is a monster. It is because the non-prophet of Islam, Muhammad, was a psychopath. Muhammad was this sadistic and twisted. Tabari. Volume 8, page 40. The messenger of God, the Islamic God anyway, commanded that furrows should be dug in the ground for the Kareza. Then he sat down. Ali and Zubair began cutting off their heads in his presence. This is from the oldest Islamic sources. These are the same people that brought you the Quran. These were, of course, furrows, not trenches, so they would have been shallow. This means that every step anyone walked in Yathrib down Medina would be on decapitated and discarded Jews. The foundation of Yathrib is murdered Jews. And it is the birthplace of Islam. Muhammad was an exceptionally evil man. based on his words, deeds, and legacy, and the carnage that he inspired, he's easily the worst person who ever lived. It's quite a statement, but it's true. Quite honestly, I'm looking forward to torturing him for the benefit of those he abused and then sending his sorry soul to hell. Therefore, I will not be this generous. Tabari 8:35, Ishak 4:64. You know that the religion that Muhammad inspired, immediately upon his death, perpetrated the war of compulsion, forcing every Arab into submission, was join us in Islam and be a savage murderer, thiever, slaver, torturer, terrorist, or die. And immediately thereafter, over the next 100 years, they waged war on the known world. They killed 1/3 of the Earth's population. Did you know that? Hundreds of millions of people died because of this man. Hooray, the enemy of Allah was brought out. He was wearing a rose-colored suit that he had torn all over with fingertip-size holes so that it would not be taken as booty. His hands were bound to his neck with a rope. Yes, Muslims are very brave when they bind their captives and they cut off their heads while their feet and arms are tied. It takes such courage, doesn't it? Oh, you Muslims screaming Allahu Akbar on 10/7 that gang raped little girls while they were screaming and cut off their breasts, played with them. Those that went into homes celebrating a Shabbat meal, tied up the parents and the children and then had them watch as you mutilated them, cutting off their fingers and toes, gouging out their eyes. And you peed on them just for good measure. Yeah, there's no excuse for Islam. It should not have survived 10/7. If progressives weren't so goddamn stupid, such that they not only sided with Islam, but celebrate it, 10/7 would have been enough to end Islam's onslaught with the rest of the world. His hands were bound to his neck with a rope. When he looked at Muhammad, he said, I do not regret opposing you. Whoever forsakes God will be damned. He sat down and was beheaded. And I can assure you, Muhammad and every Muslim involved this day and on 10/7, and every Muslim that has lived out Allah's orders and Muhammad's example in the Quran will be damned. The rabbi synthesized the Torah into a cogent response. I do not regret opposing you. Whoever forsakes, separates himself from God, will be damned, separated. Place of separation is called Sheol, it's hell. In the Torah, azab conveys forsaken, damned, and separated. That's why these books are called God damn religion. Speaking of the covenant relationship Yahweh formed with Abraham and his descendants through Jacob and Ishak, God said that those who bless Israel will be blessed, while those who curse them will be cursed. It has already happened to the Muslims, and it is going to get far worse for them over the next decade until they are all gone. Well, this isn't true either, but it is revealing. Ishak 4:64 and Tabari 8:36. According to Aisha, one Jewish woman was killed by Allah. She was by my side, talking with me and laughing while Allah's messenger was killing her men. in the midst of the marketplace. Well, it would not have been appropriate in these circumstances. During a lesser ordeal, this would have been what psychologists call a gallows laugh. It is common manifestation of extreme stress, albeit not to the level of mass murder. So while the reaction of the Jewish woman would be explainable, the behavior of the Muslim men was not. They were forcing Koreza women, Jewish women, to watch as they severed the heads of their fathers, their husbands, their brothers, and their sons. The level of human depravity depicted here and again on 10:7 would be replayed again would not be, I should say, replayed again for 1,300 years. Satan's advocate Adolf Hitler forced Jews to remove their own kin from the cyanide showers, only to place them in roaring fires of his crematorium. Doctrines demented enough to compel such behavior cannot be tolerated. While the Pope may wish to kiss the Quran, I prefer to repudiate it. But then again, the Pope was wrong about Hitler too. Ishak 464, Tabari 836. Suddenly an unseen voice cried out her name. It said, "Where is so-and-so?" She said, "Here I am." "Good heavens," I cried. "What is wrong?" She said, "I am going to be killed because of something I said." She was taken away and beheaded. Aisha used to say, "I shall never forget my wonder at her good spirits, even when she knew she was going to be killed." The testimony of the victim of unprophet-like pedophilia is revealing to a point. Based upon it, we know that the Muslim and Jewish women were made to witness the savage inhumanity of Islam. And the reasons are many, including the fact that the first and best Muslims were proud of their ability to subjugate and slaughter, just as they are to now. Watch the videos in Gaza. Watch the videos taken on 10/7. They are proud of their slaughter. They had degraded to the point that they had become sadists. They were titillated by torture. Muhammad's Muslims found the most gruesome forms of humiliation and mutilation entertaining, just as had reoccurred on 10/7. Nothing changed. Islam has remained the same. More than this, these murderous Muslims realized that the more savage they became, the greater compliance they would obtain by decapitating 1,000 Jews, bound hand and neck, and tossing their lifeless bodies into a shallow furrow in the center of the city. Islam's bloody exemplars would be able to control and rape Muslim and Jewish women without resistance, for as long as their ghoulish spectacle remained vivid in their memories and beneath their feet. Even the men were cowed, demonstrating the effectiveness of torture and terror. No one had the culture or the courage to constrain the plague of Islam when it was limited to a despicable gang in a foreboding desert. This does not speak well of Arab men, but it does explain why the most heinous of religions festered among them. Something in their culture not only deprived them of the moral fortitude required to stand up against evil and to repudiate it, but this giant gaping hole in their character laid them open to the whims of a sadistic psychopath and his abhorrent religion. The framers of Islam would have you believe differently, which is the reason for the next contrived story. One man among many is alleged to have tried to spare one among many. Should it be true, it's anecdotal and irrelevant, not only because he failed or because he was the outlier, but because he initiated his response by capitulating to the tyrant who was responsible for the carnage rather than opposing and condemning him. But nonetheless, I'm going to tell you the whole story. And by this point, with that introduction, I'm hopeful that you're capable of exercising good judgment. Tabari 8:37. Thabit said, O Allah's messenger, Zabir, who was Abu ar-Rahman, did me a favor, sparing my life, and I owe him a debt of gratitude. I wish to repay him for it. Grant me his life. The Prophet said, yeah, it's yours. I'm bored with hacking off the heads of Jews anyway. I added that part. The source of this hadith needed to be certain. Muslims didn't equate the pretense of mercy with their non-prophet being tolerant of Jews. That is why he said that this man's name was slave to ar-Rahman. If you recall, that was the name ascribed to the Lord of Islam throughout all of the initial surahs revealed in Kaabaville. Yeah, it wasn't Allah then, it was ar-Rahman. Long before Muhammad began buying his Quranic recitals from Jewish rabbis, he stole them from Arab converts to Judaism who had migrated from Yemen, and they replaced Yahweh's name with Rahman, merciful, at the direction of Yathrib rabbis. One of the great crimes here that the rabbis and Yathrib who had sold Muhammad Talmud stories that made the Quran possible. Without them, the Quran is that really ceases to exist. It has no legitimacy at all. And while telling Muhammad those Quran stories, since those Talmud stories, since the rabbis were the ones that were trying to make themselves really important, because here, of course, they're the source of Allah's Quran recitals. They claimed that the God's name, the Lord, that title, was Rabbi. Now, mind you, everything in the Quran is bastardized Hebrew. And so when they told him that Lord was Rabbi, Muhammad bought it hook, line, and sinker. And the entire Quran has Rabbi this, Rabbi that, speaking of Allah. Rabbi doesn't mean Lord. No. Adonai and Baal mean Lord. He was played for a fool. The other reason, of course, that we can be assured that this story was fabricated is because the requested favor was to repay a debt, and yet it was Muhammad's unwillingness to repay the debt he owed Jews for selling him the stories that he had twisted to complete his Quran. So we know that this was not true because Allah told us over and over again that they didn't have to pay those stinking Jews back. They had charged too much for them, he said. So here is the remainder of the fable and its unhappy ever after conclusion. Ishaq 465. So the bat went to him, and Zabar said, why do this? I'll be an old man without family and children. The bat said, Muhammad, for his family, and the bat asked Muhammad for his family, and he said, his wife and his children are yours. But Zubair said, without my property, how will I survive? So Tabat answered, and the prophets so Sabat asked the prophet for Zubair's wealth, and it was given to him. Now, these conversations never took place, obviously. Tabat went to Zubair and announced that he had been given all of his property. Yeah, right. Zubair said, Tabat, you are two-faced. Yeah, none of this happened. What has happened to Asad? Well, he was beheaded. How about Hooray. Well, he was killed. How about the fairs of Azal? Well, he was slain. How about the rest of the Kureza men? The Bat said they have all gone to their death. Zabir said, then, for the sake of the favor that I once did for you, there is no good in living any more. So the Bet brought him forward and they struck off his head. When what he said was reported to Abu Bakr, he replied, he will soon meet his dear ones in the fires of hell, and therefore there they will dwell forever. Men who were robbed, women who were raped, children who were enslaved by Muslims for no other reason than they were Jews and easy prey. According to the Muslims, their victims are in hell, not the men who did this to them. You can't fix Islam. There is no moderating of this religion. In some of the most tortured words ever written in the name of religion, we read Tabari 8, page 38. The messenger of Allah commanded that all of the Jewish men and boys who had reached puberty should be beheaded. Then the Prophet said, divide the wealth, the wives, and the children of the Banu Qurayza, Jews, among the Muslims. Ishaq 465. When their wrists were bound with cords, Allah's apostle was a sea of generosity to us. For those who have read to this point in Goddamn Religion, this is the beginning of volume 4. So 2,500 pages preceded. A comprehensive and chronological investigation of the Quran and Hadith up to this point throughout Goddamn Religion. I suppose it would be impossible to fathom something this diabolical, demented, demonic, and deadly. I know that you don't have the fortitude for me to share 4,200 pages with you. I'll go back and pick up portions of it and other programs. But based on what I saw today, you needed to listen to this segment, and we're not through. But fortunately for those who have read up to this point, who know what's in these books, you are now equipped to handle the truth about how Islam degrades humans to the point that they become inhuman. It is what this disease does to those it infects. And we're witnessing this effect worldwide, with an upwelling of rage among Muslims in the aftermath of their atrocities on October 7th, 2023. For those who think I'm making too big a deal over the escapades of Muslims mutilating, murdering, raping, abducting, incinerating, and celebrating on a single day, then you have missed the point. This day is that day. As it has been every day since Muhammad and his demonic spirit used their Quran to turn Muslims into monsters. The most pervasive and destructive plague in human history is Islam. And it is still running rampant. Therefore, today, in the aftermath of October 7th, 23, it is being used to isolate and condemn Jews worldwide and to justify stealing Israel while promoting genocide against God's people. It will inspire further attacks far worse than what we have witnessed. It is being done under the false black flag of occupation while accusing Jews of doing what Muhammad and the first Muslims have done since this day 1400 years ago. There is an ignorant and immoral religious zeal on behalf of a non-existent Fakistinian people to liberate Fakistan, such that it falls under the oppressive and deadly tyranny of Islam. The only reason that this is possible is because Jews have lost sight of the truth and are lashing out at symptoms rather than the actual menace plaguing them. They give voice to the myth of Palestinians, and they do so just as surely as they dug their own furrows of their demise in Yathrib, today's Medina. Since they have wrongly sought to integrate Muslims into Israel, the consequence is that Islam is now poised to smite Jewish necks, all while the world accuses Jews of doing what Muslims have done to them for centuries. All the while, the planet is plunged into the delusional fog of progressive ignorance and hypocrisy. It is a recipe for the eradication of freedom and life on earth. No doubt, Satan, in the guise of Allah, is one proud snake. The volumes of goddamn religion were written expressly to expose and condemn Islam, because it is quite simply the most virulent and lethal disease to ever plague our planet. I am committed to providing Israel with a God-given chance against the religious foe which has declared war against them and sought to rob them, rape them, subjugate and slaughter them to the point of extinction. Those who do not embrace this warning and act accordingly will not be among the remnant celebrating Yahweh's return with the Messiah Dode less than 9 years from this program. It will be at the culmination of Muhammad's final war against Jews. The Torah and prophets even say that these Muslims will be raping and robbing, enslaving, and murdering Jewish men, women, and children. During the afternoon of October 7th, 23, I began composing my open letter to Israel, At War with Religion is the title of it. It is presented in the snake volume of Goddamn Religion. In it, I said a number of things that bear repeating at this time. Let me share them with you. For Israel to survive, Jews must come to understand that they are at war with the religion of Islam and not Hamas. Eliminating Hamas is not only impossible, it will make no difference. And in this regard, terrorism is a tactic, it's not a foe. Muslims are the enemy because they use terror to impose their religion. 2. The myths and fables of the Fakistinians must be bluntly and resolutely denounced for Israel to survive. So long as the world believes that there is an oppressed and occupied Palestinian people, Israel remains vulnerable to the suicidal implications of an Islamic and therefore terrorist state carved out of its heart. 3. The story of every life affected by the 10/7/23 massacre needed to be vividly and uncompromisingly told, online in pictures and in words, beginning that very day, even if it cost 1 billion shekels to present every hideous detail. It would have been more valuable than 1 billion bombs. The additional grief suffered as a result of this exposure would have paled in comparison to what Jews will endure because they did not follow this advice. The most effective, this is point 4, and moral means to achieving the immediate return of the hostages abducted from Israel was to trade them for the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Without their safe and immediate return, there had to be the immediate and assured demolition of those 2 scars desecrating the Temple Mount. This approach is vastly superior to trading innocent lives for convicted Muslim murderers who, once released, will kill again. 5. Invading Gaza, I wrote then, will have no chance of success. I can say now, has proven that it had no chance of success. It, of course, played into Islam's hands, unifying the world against Israel and against Jews. When the foe is a religion, bullets and bombs manufacture more combatants than they kill. The invasion's lone advantage was that it proved that Israel is alone, isolated and loathed in the world, unable to trust or rely on anyone other than Yahweh. Good Muslims hate Israel and Jews, and the bad ones don't matter because they don't have any say in the religion. So long as Islam exists, this will not change. And now with the pervasive, progressive influence in academia, the media, in politics, and their immoral and hypocritical support for Muslims against Jews, the next 8.5 years are going to be far worse than what occurred in the 1930s and 1940s in Europe. The time has come for Yehudim and for Yisrael to stand with Yahweh and successfully battle this demonic foe. Further confirming that he was a psychopath and, of course, not a prophet, Muhammad's earliest biographer reported, then, this is Ishaq 465, then the apostle divided their property, their wives, and their children of the Quraysh among the Muslims. Allah's messenger took his fifth of the booty. He made known on that day the extra shares for the horses and their riders, giving the horse 2 shares and its rider 1. A Muslim without a horse got 1 share of the spoil. It was the first booty in which lots were cast. This not only affirms that the first and best Muslims were monsters and that they engaged in human trafficking after an appalling slaughter of innocent people. It also means that pillaging the Jews was the means to a bigger payday, world conquest. That is the only reason that the war horses received a double share of the stolen loot, including slaves. Those who had bought them with the spoils of previous assaults against the Jews were now being rewarded, encouraging them to increase their capacity for conquest. We know this to be the case since horses played no role whatsoever in the siege of the starving and defenseless neighbors of the Kareza Jews. It was to fund the future wars and world conquest of Islam. Why lots, you may be wondering? Well, casting lots is a gambling game, one, of course, expressly forbidden by the hypocrites who founded Islam. The reason, of course, is twofold. First, the religion of Islam was a joke to these fellows. They simply used it as a tool to justify their disgusting behavior. The first Muslims were less religious than Hitler's SS. Second, the mercenaries needed a pecking order in which to select Jewish homes, properties, business, women, and children. Muhammad didn't want them squabbling. Some sex slaves were younger and prettier than others. This was a game to them. In the name of full disclosure, here is the report of Islam's first and finest historian, Tabari, Volume 8, page 38. On that day, Muhammad made known the shares of the horsemen and the shares of the foot soldiers, and he deducted from these shares his fifth. A horseman received 3 shares, 2 shares for the horse and 1 for its rider. The foot soldier received 1 share. The cavalry at battle with the Kareza numbered 36 horses. It was the first booty in which shares were allotted to them. According to this example, which is Sunnah, the procedure of the Messenger of Allah and the division of booty became a precedent, which was followed in all subsequent raids. That means every terrorist raid perpetrated by Muhammad was for one purpose: booty. They stole. Islam existed to justify stealing. And so that those they stole from wouldn't complain, they killed them. Every Islamic apologist could cry out for 1,000 years and not undo the damage done by Muhammad and his militants. We put ourselves and those we love in harm's way when we allow Islam to masquerade as an Abrahamic religion. Islam is more similar to Nazism than it is to Christianity. These crimes must not go unpunished. There's further evidence that Islam was conceived to wage war against all mankind and that it funded that quest by capturing and selling humans. We find Tabari 8:39. Then the messenger of Allah sent Saad bin Zayed with some of the Kareza captives to Najd. In exchange for them, he purchased horses and arms. Jewish lives were traded for war horses and weapons. Islam was built by killing Jews and selling them into slavery. And you progressives out there, you college libertarians, you liberals, you disgusting progressives marching in the street with this despicable religion, If you had a conscience, you'd be ashamed. If you had any morality, you would run and hide. But no, you're just ignorant, grossly immoral, hypocritical. And your alliance with Muslims is the greatest threat to life and liberty this planet has ever known. Well, it was obvious, which is why I acknowledged it previously, but now we have this testimony from the mouths of the men who brought the Quran and Hadith to us. The earliest and most respected historian of Islam's formative years and the Quran's first commentator was diligent in his reporting and allowed the first and best Muslims and their nonprofit to confess to their crime. Muhammad's appalling malcontents captured Jewish women to sell them into sexual slavery, and they traded the lives of Jewish children for war horses and for weapons. For this crime alone, Islam has no right to exist, much less be respected. Nothing could be clearer. Hitler financed his war machine on booty he stole from Jews too. In slave labor camps, he forced Jews to work without, so that he could wouldn't have to pay them for building his planes, his tanks, and his bombs. Muhammad set the precedent, funding his war effort on the flesh and property of God's people. These men and their methods were identical. And one day, within the next decade, this maniacal doctrine with its formidable allies will be unleashed on a world of 8 billion souls, replete with nuclear and biological weapons. Billions are going to die in their ignorance. And you know something? I don't much care. You will have brought this on yourself. But I care about God's people. And it is for them that I bring these programs, that I have written these books, so that they might be protected from this deadliest of all plagues. The reason that Allah approved rape through sex with captives and slaves in the 33rd surah was because Muhammad was about to indulge. Tabari 8:38. The Prophet selected for himself from among the Jewish women of the Qurayza, Rayhana bint Amr. She became his concubine. When he predeceased her, she was still in his possession. When the messenger of Allah took her as a captive, she showed herself adverse to Islam and insisted on Judaism. Muhammad was a rapist, and he was the worst kind of rapist. He was a serial rapist, and he was the worst kind of serial rapist because he had killed this woman's father, her brothers, murdered them in front of her, and then he raped her. If you are not enraged, if this doesn't cause you to hate Muhammad and the despicable religion that he connived to kill Jews, there's something wrong with you. You have a broken conscience. You have no morality. You're incapable of executing good judgment. Think about that. You're a worthless human being if you do not hate Islam based upon what you have just learned, what you witnessed on 10/7, what you witnessed today in Gaza. It is not a corruption of Islam. It is Islam exactly the way Muhammad lived it, the way Muhammad taught it, the way Allah endorsed it, the way the Quran preaches it. Now imagine the horror of being a sex slave, of the man who had murdered your father and your brothers. Imagine being forced to have sex with a man who had given your mother up to be raped and who sold your sisters into slavery to buy swords so that he could terrorize and torment others. It's chilling. This is perversity on an unimaginable scale. Muhammad was the most reprehensible of subhumans, and Islam is his religion. The first who chronicled the prophet's revolting life explains, Ishaq 466. The apostle, obviously taking first dibs, chose one of the Jewish women for himself. Her name was Rahana. She remained with him until she died in his power. The apostle proposed to marry her. Oh, yeah, right. And put the veil over her, but she said, "Leave me under your power, for that will be easier." She showed a repugnance towards Islam when she was captured, as should every human on the planet. You should show a repugnance against Islam. If you do not show a repugnance of Islam, you have no conscience. You have no morality. You are a disgusting human being if you are not repugnant towards Islam. Muhammad raped Rayana after killing, enslaving, and plundering her family. If you want to understand the doctrine of submission, put yourself in her sandals. Gaze into the eyes of the man who slithered into your city with a malignant gang of Muslims who is now abusing you sexually after murdering, robbing, and enslaving everyone you knew and loved. That is Islam, as portrayed by the man who is inseparable from the religion. Ishaq 466. Allah sent down a Quran surah concerning the trench and the Qurayza raid. The account is found in the Confederates or Allied troops. In it, he mentions their trial and his kindness to the Muslims. Remember, we sent a wind against the armies, and they could not see. There were no armies, they were just merchants, and winds blow all the time in the desert. For Allah to claim that the wind here was his lone miracle means that Allah was incapable of doing anything. I don't even know if snakes fart, but that might have been the extent of his capabilities. Rocks, I suppose, can roll over, but I don't think Allah learned that trick. In it, he mentions their trial and his kindness to the Muslims. Remember, we sent a wind against the armies, and they could not see. Allah, by the way, the trench was all around Yathrib. If, say, the wind was blowing from the north, wouldn't it be in the face of the defenders? If they were on the north side, wouldn't it be in either face equally on the east and the west? Is Allah directionally challenged? Or maybe it was a wind gust that just came down and blew everything out. Right. Muslims never even think. Allah sent his wind with his angels. Oh, yes, got to have the killer angels in there. Allah said, when they came at you from above and below. Who came at you from above and below? There's no above and below in the desert there. It's flat. When they came at you from above and below, is that the angels? And when eyes grew wild and hearts reached your throats, you harbored doubts about Allah. Those in whose hearts was a disease said, What? Allah and his messenger has promised us nothing but delusion. Part was true enough. Before I comment, let's read on. Eshach 467. Allah addressed the believers and said, and Allah's apostle, you have a fine example for anyone who hopes to be in the place where Allah is. Why don't you check out where Allah spends all of his time, Muslims, in the Quran? Because I have. Every reference to Allah doing anything in the Quran is Allah in hell torturing people, roasting them over his fire, replacing their skin when one's skin gets too singed to feel torture anymore, pouring pitch and boiling water down their throats, making them eat thorns. He is constantly in hell torturing people. So if you want to be where Allah is, guess where you're going? It'll be a happy reunion for Muslims, won't it? Eshach 468. Then Allah said, some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying. Some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying. A Muslim vows to die for Allah. Allah wants every human dead. You have finished your work, and you have returned to me, like those who sought martyrdom in prior battles. And some of you are still waiting to capitalize on Allah's promise of martyrdom. You do not hesitate in your religion, and you never doubt. Eshach is the oldest, most credible collection of hadith from Muhammad, this one from Allah, and from the first Muslims. It is brought to you by exactly the same people who brought you the Quran. And in Eshach 464, we read, and Allah said, some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying. You have finished your work and returned to me like those who sought martyrdom in prior battles. Sought martyrdom. Sought to die killing. This is Islam. This is Allah speaking. And some of you are still waiting to capitalize on it and Allah's promise of martyrdom. You do not hesitate in your religion and never doubt. Islam is a death cult. Muslims are not only killers for Allah, they want to die killing for Allah. Everyone dead. The murderers and those they have murdered. Islam exists to annihilate the human race. Beginning with Jews. Eshach 468. Allah brought down the people of the scripture book. I forced the Qurayza from their homes, Allah speaking, and I cast terror into their hearts. Some you slew, and some you took captive. You killed their men, and you enslaved their women and children. And I caused you to inherit their land, their dwellings, and their property. Allah can do all things. And you have leaders in Israel that say that we need to reform the Palestinian Authority, that we need to de-radicalize their textbooks, that we need to moderate Islam, that we need to eliminate Hamas, and it'll all be fine among the other Muslims in Gaza. How could you be so stupid? Why do you have a Shin Bet? Why do you have a Mossad? Why do you have an IDF intelligence if they can be that stupid? Why do you elect officials that lie to you? This is the truth. I'm reading it to you right out of their books. This is the scripture of Islam. This is the God of Islam speaking. This religion exists to annihilate everyone on earth. You heard it right from Allah. And worse than annihilating every human on earth, this goddamn religion is committed to beginning by killing Jews. It's disgusting. It's reprehensible. It's so bad that the only reasonable option is to openly expose and condemn Islam using its own scriptures, and then isolate it, quarantine it so that Muslims can only kill Muslims. You can't fix a Muslim. You can't fix Islam. You can't resolve this religion. You can't kill yourself to victory or kill them to victory. But all you can do is isolate them. Take away their weapons, stop selling them more weapons, stop giving them money. If they wish to kill one another with sticks and stones, let them do so. You can't fix them. Do not bring them into your home. It's like bringing the bubonic plague into Europe and the Americas. Isolate them, quarantine them as you would any disease. And this is the most deadly disease in human history. Well, I recognize that we have contemplated Allah's endorsement of genocide in the 33rd Surah. Ishaq's review of the Quran ties the Islamic God irrevocably to the Islamic Holocaust. It has brought the Hadith and the Quran together as one. And there is no question that Ishaq's interpretation of the Surah, as the earliest and best researched, is the most credible in Islam. Therefore, when Allah told Muslims to follow Muhammad's example, he was specifically encouraging a fascist dictatorship, denial of all freedoms, anti-Semitism, ruthless terrorism, mass murder, continual war, armed robbery, the slave trade, the deprivation of women's rights, pedophilia, incest, and rape. Islam is the only religion in human history to sanctify the worst in human behavior. Since kindness has been redefined by Allah as affecting the humiliation of God's people while perpetrating genocide, enslaving and raping innocent families, and robbing them of their lives, their property, their liberty, we would do well to properly calibrate what mercy and forgiveness mean under these circumstances. When Allah protests that He is most merciful, oft forgiving, and the best of helpers, remember how He defined kindness when Muslims were acting as sadistic savages against Jews. Perhaps what Allah has promised is nothing but delusion after all. And yet, Allah is so impotent, the devil's lone contribution was to claim that he made it windy in the desert, which is akin to saying that it is wet in the ocean. But since the Quraysh set a siege around Yathrib, wouldn't the wind have been to their back and the Muslims' faces on the other side of town, thwarting Allah's strategy? Since wind is a function of pressure differentials due to uneven heating and cooling, what was the purpose of the angels? They were just blowhards? Or said another way, in posturing such a ridiculous notion, was Allah simply playing Muslims for fools? There was, however, a nugget of truth in this diatribe. Those who follow Muhammad's appalling example will go to the place where Allah is. Unfortunately for them, it is called Sheol, hell, and I will assure that every one of them arrives there. It'll be a very religious place. Lots of prostrations, I suppose. It has been obvious from the beginning that Islam is a murderous death cult. The highest calling is for a Muslim to die as a martyr, killing for Allah, which means everyone dies. But Islam's nasty business has seldom been as bluntly presented as it was here in the surah. Allah said, "Some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying. You have finished your work." Yep. "And you have returned to me like those who sought martyrdom in prior battles. Some of you are still waiting to capitalize on Allah's promise of martyrdom. You do not hesitate in your religion, and you never doubt." This change from demonic diatribes to unrelenting slaughter was made manifest during the Pledge of Aqaba. It was so profoundly important to Islam that the religion dates its beginning to this declaration of war against all mankind, rather than to the first Quranic revelation 12 years prior. On that day, in AH-1, 622 CE, a gang of renegade pagan Arabs from the Jewish farming community of Yathrib raised their hand, saluted Muhammad, and changed the world with this affirmation: "We pledge our allegiance to you, and we shall defend you as we would our women folk. Administer the oath of allegiance to us, messenger of Allah, for we are men of war possessing arms and coats of mail. O messenger, there are ties between us and the Jews which we shall have to sever. If we do this, and Allah gives you victory, will you perhaps return to your own people and leave us?" Muhammad smiled and said, "Nay, blood is blood, and bloodshed without retaliation is blood paid for. You are of me, and I am of you. I shall wage war against whomever you fight." Ishaq 204 and Tabari 6:134. Men of the Courage, do you know what you are pledging yourselves to and swearing allegiance to this man? "Yes," they answered, "in swearing allegiance to him, we are pledging ourselves to wage war against all mankind." We are pledging ourselves to wage war against all mankind. This is the first moment of the first day of the first year of the Islamic era. Islam was conceived. It was literally born to wage war against all mankind. Well, not my words, they're theirs. Ignorance of them will only get you killed. Ishaq 205. If you are loyal to this undertaking, it will profit you in this world and in the next. They said, "We will accept you as a prophet under these conditions, but we want to know specifically what we will get in return for our loyalty." Muhammad answered, "I promise you paradise." So, reach out your hand. They stretched out their arms, and they swore allegiance to this man. And as a result, hundreds of millions of people would die. Allah had the death cult he craved. This is Islam. The Islam of Muhammad. The Islam of the Sunnah, the Hadith, of the Quran, of Islam's beginning, of Islam today. It is the Islam of the Muslims who perpetrated 10/7 and who celebrated their carnage this day in Gaza. Ishaq 205, Tabari 6:133. When we had all sworn the oath of allegiance to the messenger, Satan shouted from the top of Aqaba in the most piercing and penetrating voice I have ever heard. People of the stations of Mina, do you want to follow a blameworthy reprobate? The messenger said, what does the enemy of God say? I am the devil, and I shall deal with you. Did I mention to you that Muhammad, on the night of his first Quranic revelation in a cave where he was beaten by the demonic spirit nearly to death, that he tried to commit suicide because he knew that he had been demon-possessed and admitted as much, and that on his deathbed he reaffirmed that he was demon-possessed and that a demon had been with him the entire time. Must I tell you that there is a Quran surah devoted to demons who love the Quran and who affirmed, just as Satan did here, that you're following a blameworthy reprobate. I am the devil, and I shall deal with you. And this was the result, Ishaq 468. Allah brought down the people of the scripture book. I forced the Qurayza from their homes and cast terror into their hearts. Some you slew and some you took captive. You killed their men, you enslaved their women and their children, and I caused you to inherit their land, their dwellings, and their property. Allah can do all things. This isn't complicated. It is not veiled. It is just awful. It's inexcusable. A religion like this has no right to exist. Those who tolerate it are guilty of genocide. And this time, it is people's side. This religion is opposed to all humanity. It exists to wipe out the human race. The first Muslims were proud of themselves. Ishaq 468, Gabriel came to the apostle when Saad was taken. He visited him in the middle of the night wearing an embroidered turban and said, O Muhammad, who is this dead man for whom the doors of heaven have been opened and at whom the throne shook? Yeah, the fat man that pronounced the judgment of Allah and his apostle that all of the Jewish men and boys should be killed and their children enslaved and their property stolen, divided amongst the Muslims. Oh yes, the gates of thrones of heaven shuddered. Since pretend Gabriel is credited with revealing the Quran to Muhammad, isn't it odd that he would need to ask the messenger about something that allegedly happened in heaven? Muslims don't think this through, do they? Moreover, the dead man opening heaven's doors was a thug, a rootless anti-Semite who loved to kill. If these behaviors rock Allah's throne, the Islamic God is a rather nasty fellow. Ishaq 468, Saad was a fat man, but those who carried his funeral pyre said they'd never carried a lighter one. Muhammad said, He had angelic pallbearers because the angels rejoiced when Saul's spirit shook Allah's throne. As popular as diets are today, I'm surprised that Muslims don't recommend slaughtering others and condemning Jews as the fastest way to lose weight. Ishaq 469 and Ansar recited this poem. The throne of Allah shook for only one man, Saad, the brave and the bold, the glorious leader, a knight ever ready, stepping into the battle, he cut heads to pieces. Saint Saad, a genuine Muslim hero who cut heads to pieces. Ishaq 469, the apostle said, every wailing woman lies except those who weep for Saad. Aisha, the mother of the faithful, was asked, how did the messenger of God behave? She replied, his eye did not weep for anyone. Dear Rasuli and dear Führer were cut out of the same psychotic cloth. Ishaq 469, on the day of the Kareza, when the Jews were slain, one Muslim was martyred. A stone was thrown on him, and it inflicted a shattering wound. The apostle said, he will have the reward of 2 martyrs. In Islam, you get bonus points for killing, robbing, and enslaving Jews. These poetic lines were recited during the Islamic Holocaust, Ishaq 470. We attacked them fully armed, sharp swords in hand, cutting through heads and skulls. This is a religion of a different order, isn't it? So what do you suppose would happen if these men were given their own state carved out of Israel and then were armed to the teeth? This could serve as Islam's byline, Ishaq 471. We were steadfast in trusting him. We have a prophet by whom we will conquer all men. You want to be next? All means all. That's all. All means. Ishaq 472. Muhammad's companions are the best in war. I beg to differ. It wasn't true then, not by a long shot, and it's not true now, but who's to blame them for trying? Ishaq 473. Muhammad and his companions humiliated every doubter. That wasn't true either. Even to this day, doubters outnumber believers 4-1. And even then, belief is encouraged through threat of death. Ishaq 475. Allah commanded that the horses be kept for his enemy in the fight so that they might vex them. We obeyed our prophet's orders when he called us to war. When he called for violent efforts, we made them. The prophet's command is obeyed, for he is truly believed. He will give us victory, glory, and a life of ease. Those who called Muhammad a liar disbelieved, and they have gone astray. They attacked our religion, and they would not submit. May I repeat that? Ishaq, page 475, the oldest and most credible assemblage of hadith from Muhammad and his companions. Allah commanded that horses be kept for his enemy and in the fight so that they might vex them. We obeyed our prophet's orders when he called us to war. When he called for violent efforts, we made them. The prophet's command is obeyed, for he is truly believed. He will give us victory, glory, and a life of ease. Those who call Muhammad a liar disbelieve and go astray. They attacked our religion and would not submit. If you live in Sweden today, I guess the answer is You just go ahead and submit to the religion. And I'm sure they'll stop raping your women. They'll stop killing you if you just submit to them. Armed militants starved defenseless families into submission. And then they beheaded and enslaved them because they would not obey Muhammad and submit to Allah and the religion of Islam. Therefore, when the Islamic religion is practiced in accordance with Muhammad's orders and Allah's commands, as they are recorded in the Hadith comprising Sunnah and in the Quran, Muslims wage war against all mankind, annihilating and ruthlessly subjecting those who do not capitulate. And when we acknowledge the obvious, that both were sadistic psychopaths, engaged in promoting and glorifying the most savage and appalling acts imaginable, this is a highly unappealing outcome. So in this case, the Jews in Yathrib serve as the canary in the mine, predicting what will happen to the rest of humanity if this toxin, this demonic plague, is not contained. The Muslims who knew Muhammad's Sunnah and Allah's Quran from personal experience have defined their war against humanity as the product of blind obedience, a lifestyle of terror, the glorification of violence, the victory through grotesque immorality. Islamic jihad was designed to be vexing, which is to say that Muslims will distress and annoy, harass and confound disbelievers in abusive fashion, aggravating and exacerbating them in ways that are hard to understand for as long as the religion exists. This is Satan's attempt. To forestall Yahweh's return, he must either turn men into unappealing monsters or exterminate them. Islam does both. Ishaq 479. Slain in Allah's religion, Saad inherits paradise with the martyrs. He was a noble testimony. When he pronounced his verdict on the Qurayza, he did not judge on his own volition. His judgment and Allah's were one. Saad is among those who sold his life for the Garden of Bliss. Considering the verdict called for genocide, larceny, and enslavement, Allah's complicity in these crimes should be troublesome. This too is hideous. Ishaq 481. The apostles slew them in their own town. With our troops, he surrounded their homes. We shouted outcries in the heat of battle. The Jews were given the scripture and they wasted it. Being blind, the illiterate man said, they strayed from the Torah. You Jews disbelieved in the Quran, and yet you have tasted the confirmation of what it said. May Allah make our raid on them immortal. May fire burn in their quarter. They will no longer ruin our lands. You Jews have no place here, so be off. May I remind you that it was the Muslims that invaded this town? The Jews had been there for 1,400 years. May I remind you that the confirmation of the Quran was genocide. May I remind you that Muslims ought not complain for me sharing this story with you, because Allah wanted to make this raid on the Jews, their mass murder, their kidnapping, enslavement, plunder of them, immortal. I've tried to do so. I should get a warm handshake from the snake. The snake had hands. They will no longer ruin our lands. Bull. They weren't in your land. They were in theirs. You invaded theirs, just as you have Israel. And of course, the Quran contradicts the Quran and the Torah in every possible way. One of the many proofs that Islam is full of it. I guess to each his own, free will and all. But it will not be without consequence. With Yahweh's support and direction, I promise to hold all of these men accountable for their barbaric crimes. And an eternity of separation in Sheol, which is assured, will be insufficient to recompense those that these deceived savages have abused. I will not stop there. I will pursue every one of them, and I will have them, every Muslim, repay for what they did to God's people. In addition to those who aided and abetted them, to those who applauded them, to all of those in Gaza today, I'm going to hold them to the same standard as I will anti-Semitic Christians, the rabbis who have misled God's people, the fascists and the communists and the progressives of Europe and America who condemn God's people. So believe and promote whatever you will, but be advised that there is a God, and he is not amused. In this case, these Muslims were so stupid and gluttonous that they believed and repeated Muhammad's and Allah's lives. While it is true that Jews were the conduit through whom Yahweh provided the Torah and the Nabi, and while Jews have largely squandered it, straying far from the Torah with their Talmud, the Quran is in irrefutable and irreconcilable conflict with God's testimony. For in the Torah and Nabi, Yahweh returns for his people, reconciling himself with them by affirming the Bereth while integrating his Torah into our lives. He does not attack, enslave, or annihilate his own family. And yet the Quran was confirmed by perpetrating the very crimes that Yahweh will forever resolve. It is also true, at least to a point, that the Quran and Hadith have immortalized the nature of Islamic atrocities, especially against Jew and their own kin. The learned and wise, the compassionate and courageous can expose and condemn Islam because Muslims confess to the most heinous of crimes. There is no need to speculate, no need to interpret, because the evidence has been retained for us to evaluate and excoriate. There is a haunting echo in what was said on this day, speaking of Yathrib, which Yehudim and Israelites had called home for the past 1,400 years. The Muslims who had invaded the city just 4 years prior and would soon rename what they stole Medina, had the audacity to say, "They will no longer ruin our lands. You Jews have no place here, so be off." How is that any different than Muslims invading Judea and Israel, the homeland of Yehudim and Israelites for the past 4,000 years, and doing so again at the time of October 7th, 23, with their invasion, while renaming it Palestine and claiming that Jews no longer belong? Is this hadith not the forerunner of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which predisposes dispossessing Jews in favor of Muslims? Is it not by knowing Islam's past that we come to understand its present and our future if we remain ignorant of it? And to think progressives who insist that they are enlightened are the ones facilitating genocide, ignorant of these confessions. I have one more to share with you. It is from Ishaq, the Sirah, the biography of Allah's Messenger. Page 480. It reads, "The Qurayza met their misfortune. In humiliation, they found no helper. A calamity worse than that which fell upon the Nadir befell them. On that day, Allah's messenger came to them like a brilliant moon. We left them with blood upon them like a fresh pool. They lay prostrate with the vultures circling round. I am Craig Wynn. I have brought you the truth. What you do with it now is up to you. I thank you for listening to this, the second episode of Islam's Holocaust on the Iowa blog.